Shalom. I'm going to start off source by giving no praise to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Ba'ashem, Ka'akadash. Double honor to the Apostle of Great Most High, and honor to you brothers doing the work of the Most High in truth and in sincerity. Yahweh's real name, of whom the world ignorantly calls God, Jehovah, Yahweh. His real name is Yahweh. His son's true name is Yahushua. And when we pray Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, meaning in, meaning done, Shem, meaning names Yahweh, in the name of Yahushua. Real quick, just wanted to touch on this one. Lord's will, it can be edifying. I'm cooked right now, so bear with me. But yeah, just wanted to go into this, statement that I've said, someone else said it, but it's a point that I through the Spirit I kind of go into, about how basically what E has done with this whole DEI push is he's basically made it such that if you are a Jake, and you are in certain positions of, the Lord's basically, has it such that you are in a certain position, right? The Edomites around you basically used that whole DEI conversation as a cope, right? As a way to diminish what it is that you, through the Spirit, have been able to do, okay? So I chucked it into the robot, and I said, critique this statement in a well thought out, balanced manner. And, at first I thought it was hella scoffing at me, but it was actually going into some other stuff, that I basically, this kind of statement doesn't really touch on. Okay. So it says that sentence. So I said, I heard someone say, me, DEI actually diminished the accomplishments of highly skilled, so-called black people, but we ain't, a black, that's just a label that E put on us, right, as part of his witchcraft, against us, right, as it framed their achievements as just, quote, diversity highs, right. So it says that sentence is tapping into a very real tension, but it's also doing some sneaky simplifications. Let's unpack it from a few angles, right. What it gets right, stigma and diversity high stereotypes do exist, okay. Right, because there's been a competition between E and J, for since the womb, right? Right, just go straight to the verse. Right, it's Genesis 25 and 22. Right, it says, I'll start from 21. And Isaac entreated Yahweh for his wife because she was barren, and Yahweh was entreated of him, and Rebekah his wife conceived, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, "If it be so, why am I thus?" And she went to inquire of Yahweh, and Yahweh said unto her, "Two nations are in thy womb, and two manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger." Okay, and basically when you go into this, basically, the two in the womb, right, we were fighting E, right, we were fighting E, and a death match, as has been said before, right. So there was just this beef between us, between Jacob and Esau, right? And it's something that has, ultimately perpetuated until this day, right? In fact, let's grab this real quick. Ezekiel 35 and 5. It says, "Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel, but the force of the sword, and the time of their calamity, and the time that their iniquity had an end." You look into this word here, perpetual, goes into, let's just open it up. Right, I will roughly, because that's sounding very similar to I will in Isaiah 7:14. So maybe I'm not pronouncing it the best, right? Right, but basically it says long duration, right, antiquity, futurity, right, forever, everlasting, right. So this man has had of antiquity, he's had a hatred for us, right. So he'll do everything that he can to try and diminish and trying to, make us look as if we're the weaker one, right. But actually, he's the weaker, as we have just read, right. We're the stronger, and in the time to come, he will be serving us, right. So let's finish off this verse, right. It says, read again. This is Ezekiel 35 and 5. "Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred, and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, and the time that their iniquity had an end. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord power, I'll prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Sith thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee." Okay. So basically, blood's going ultimately pursue this Edomite, because this Edomite ain't, he hasn't had an issue shedding blood. Okay. He hasn't had an issue shedding blood, and therefore he will be punished for that. Okay, so let's go back to this, right? So it says, what the segment gets, right? Stigma and diversity, high stereotypes do exist. It's true that some people look at any so-called black person in a top role and immediately think they're only there because of DEI. Okay, so that's certainly something that E pushed out. It was a cope, right? A mechanism for him to it was two-pronged, right? But certainly part one of those prongs was to basically allow these lower level Edomites to, to cope, right? It's not that, because then that Edomite can then look and be like, well, I didn't get it, not because I'm not high IQ, right? And not because that Jake is high IQ, but because there are programs that allows them to get a footing in this world. But these times, right, these Edomites have had the biggest footing, okay? Because it ultimately it's their kingdom, right? And this, through a means of Edomite supremacy, right? They've been able to get a leg up, all right, and get acceptance in places where really they had no right being accepted, okay? But that's just, right now they're in a rulership seat, right? In fact, let's grab that real quick. This is Job 9:24. Right, it says, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If not, where and who is he? Okay, so that's what it is, right? So it says, the earth is given into the hands of the wicked. So the Lord has basically put this Edomite in the rulership seat. Okay, so of course he's going to make it such that his people, right, if you will, right, get certain privileges. Now the elites ultimately have holded all of the power, all of the the goodies to themselves, right? But these lower level Edomites have been able to get the very, very, very tiny crumbs, right, that the elites have left for them. Okay, but let's carry on, right? So it says, so yes, DEI initiatives can sometimes be used as pretext by biased observers, and this is it, like as we read in Ezekiel 35, right? These Edomites, they have a hatred for us, so by default, right, they're biased observers, right? To downgrade someone's accomplishments, that feels awful, right? If you're highly qualified and worked incredibly hard. Right, it says badly designed DEI can reinforce tokenism when organizations talk a lot about representation, but very little about rigor, standards, and excellence. And when you look at some of the things that, and some of the ways that E frames these conversations, like I remember, I forgot who it was, well, basically they were going into how, one of the elders was going into how E, will talk about the fact that there was a certain level, right, of quote unquote DEI pilots that they were trying to get, but they never said anything about lowering the standards for them to be a pilot, etc. Okay, so they didn't talk about as much about that, but they just talked about this other thing, right, which once again pushes that idea of tokenism. Okay, says highlight a few individuals as our device hires or quietly pressure managers to hit a number without explaining the broader strategy, right? It says where the statement is incomplete or misleading, right? It says black competence was being questioned long before DEI, right? So that's what I was saying at first. I was just there like, why is chat capping against me, right? But it was actually going to, basically, it was basically building upon several different things, right? This idea that once again, E has always looked down on Jake, okay? E has always looked down on Jake. Right, that perpetual hatred is real, right? And he's going to keep, he's going to keep basically pushing ways to keep Jake down, right? So that he can then go on and, basically accuse us, right? Let's grab that as well, right? Because a lot of the shit that he pushes, right, Jake be going into it, right? But really these things are, and don't get me wrong, these Jakes that be going in and falling all the way into the systems and traps that Esau sets for them, they will be judged for that, right? We're not, partial, right? When we talk about these things, we're impartial, okay? Meaning we go in and we basically speak about everyone and everything. It goes on to say, Revelation 12:10, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength, the kingdom of our power, and the power of his anointed, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our power day and night, right? And that's it. Esau was the accuser, man, right? He pushes out all of these things to then try and look down on Jake, right? So to get the other heathen nations to look down on Jake, right? But through the Spirit, right, these heathen nations more and more, they're starting to look down on you, okay? They're starting to look down upon you. And then the kingdom, when you're brought down, Scripture says they shall narrowly look upon thee. Right? Is this the man that made the world to tremble? Right? That did shake kingdoms? That's what is gonna come of you, right? Except everything against you is gonna be true. Right? The things that you push on Jake, one, you poison Jake, and then you say, look, you see, right? But then two, you also just lie. Okay? So going back into the thing, right? So suspicion of black competence at work is not new and not caused by DEI. Long before formal DEI programs, many so-called black professionals were already assumed to be less capable, right? Mistaken for junior staff assistants or security, seen as exceptions or quota hires in informal ways. Right? So it's not that DEI introduced stigma more often, right? DEI simply made visible attention that was already there. Some people don't believe so-called black folks belong at the top unless they're flawless and overqualified, and that's it, right? Jake always has to do a lot more than these other, these what do you call it, other, nations, right? And it's all a media thing, because what there's is image that pushes out that Moab is smart. Right, but then, certain times I'll be just listening to certain of these Moabites, they'd be dumb as hell, right? They've just got the veneer of looking smart, right? That thing of book smart, right? B says the statement treats merit as if it were neutral and unproblematic, right? Before DEI, hiring equals pure merit. After DEI, hiring equals compromise by diversity. But in reality, hiring was always influenced by non-merit factors, right? Going into this idea that people will ultimately always, nepotism being the word, right? So this idea that, which is why, different apostle elders say that he has been the biggest benefactor of so-called DEI, right? Or rather, maybe let's not call it DEI, but this whole idea of just like being put into places without merit, right? He's the biggest recipient of that. Okay. Says the quote quietly accepts the DEI excellent false choice, right? And point 3, right, says the psychological trap, how stigma lands on so-called black professionals, right? One important thing the statement does capture is how DEI rhetoric can feel, right? But yeah, that's it. So let's get some other precepts, right? Because at the end of the day, right, we are the greatest, right, to the spirit and power of Yahweh Hashem Yahushai, right? This is Psalms 82:6. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High, right? And that's it, right? We're a nation of kings and priests, right? Right now, the Lord has brought us down into a low position, right? But we're waiting for the time when the Lord will raise us back up, right? It says Baruch 3 and 35. It says, this is our power, and there shall none other be accounted of in comparison of him. He hath found out all the way of knowledge, and hath given it to Jacob his servant, and to Israel his beloved. Right? So our power is a power of knowledge. Right? And in the same way, right, his men, right, the nation that he made, right, are basically, we take after that, right? Now, yes, he has brought us into a low position to the end where we, as a nation, right, there's certain things that, you look at Jake and you'd be like, yo, can these bones live, right? But when all is said and done, we're still Israel. Right, we're the salt of the earth. We can jump over to that as well. So Matthew 7 and 13. It says, that's not what I want. Where is it? All right, it says Matthew 5 and 13. Slaki, right? Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men. Right, so we're the salt of the earth. Right, and ultimately, when you look into a lot of these things, right, Jake has always been there or thereabouts, right? And then let's grab this as well. This is Deuteronomy 7 from 6. Ooh, whoops, will it work it out for me? No. This is Jude 27. It says, "For thou an holy people unto the Lord thy power, and how thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." Right now we are, the Lord has brought us into a low position, right? That's part of our punishment, right? But we're coming into a time, right? When this man's kingdom is brought down, right? The Lord's going, give us that heart of flesh, right? And we're going to be able to truly get into that position of being kings and priests, right? We go and exude the brilliance that the Lord Yahweh designed us to have in the first place, right? Once again, right now we just, the Lord just brought us low. Okay. This is Deuteronomy 4 and 5. It says, "Behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, right? Even as Yahweh my power commanded me, that ye should do so in the land whither ye go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is wise and understanding people," right? So basically that thing of wisdom, right? We're going, Lord's going to allow us to tap back into that, right? Right now, once again, we just ain't there. Right now we just, we don't have it like that. Okay. But the Lord's going to make a way, right? The Lord's going to bring down this Edomite, and he's going to raise his men back up to the excellent state, starting off with the elect, but then trickling down to all of Israel, right? So I just wanted to touch on that real quick. This, once again, this idea that, he uses these different things as a cope, right? We are better than him, right? But as with everything, he always wants to try and take control of the narrative, right? So Lord's what I was edifying. Till next time, we say shalom.